everyone, welcome back to SJ's classes and yet another video lesson on your first module of literary criticism paper, which is classical criticism. Hello dear students, welcome to the world of online learning. In the earlier videos, we saw two popular Greek critics, Aristotle and his master Plato, and a Roman critic, Horace. We saw how Plato, in his popular work Republic, banishes poets and poetry from his ideal state. We also saw how Plato's disciple Aristotle defends poetry against the charges leveled against it by his master Plato. We also went through the various contributions that Aristotle made towards literary criticism. His concepts like mimesis, catharsis, hamartia, spudeos. Both Plato and Aristotle uses the term mimesis, but with a difference. The former sees it in a derogative sense and the latter sees it as a creative process. We also looked at the formative elements of tragedy according to Aristotle, the 6 formative elements, which are plot, character, thought, diction, music and spectacle. We saw why Aristotle regards plot as the soul of a tragedy, as the principal element of a tragedy. Then we came to the Roman critic Horace. His most popular contribution to literary criticism is Ars Poetica, or The Art of Poetry, which was translated into English by Ben Jonson. It's more like a guide to the art of literary composition. It's through this particular work that he spoke to or inspired aspiring poets what ought to be written and what ought not to be written if they wanted to be successful poets. He gives many advices like not to present violent scenes on the stage. Media res must be used as far as narration is concerned. So he gives these bits of advices for aspiring poets. Now it's time to come to the last critic of the classical age. He is yet another Greek critic and his name is Longinus. Let's have a look at the author Longinus and his valuable contribution towards literary criticism.
Longinus is the name associated with the Latin treatise commonly known as On the Sublime. It is one of the most influential and perceptive works of literary criticism ever written. Longinus is considered as the third member of the classical triumvirate of criticism, the other two critics being Aristotle and Horace. The authorship of the treatise, Hypsos, alternatively called as On the Sublime, has been translated by many popular writers. We have translations like Elevated Writing by Wordsworth, On the Sovereign Perfection of Writing by Arthur Quiller Couch, Elevation of Language by Alan Tate. The name of the author to whom the work is ascribed is just a conjecture, and even the date of composition, 1st or 3rd century AD is uncertain. There has been considerable dispute as to the author of On the Sublime. One is Cassius Longinus, who was born about 210. He was a critic, scholar, and teacher of rhetoric in the 3rd century, and a friend and teacher of Porphyry, the pupil of Plotinus and author of many literary texts. He also earned a reputation as the most famous scholar of his time. Educated at Alexandria, he probably taught at Athens and then traveled to Asia Minor as a minister of Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. Along with Zenobia, he is reported to have been executed by the Roman Emperor Aurelian in 273 on charges of conspiring against the Roman state. So this particular person, Cassius Longinus, is considered as the first possible name or the person behind the composition of the work on the Sublime. We have yet another suggestion. Another suggestion made by the critics is Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who wrote under Emperor Augustus. He has also published a number of works. Dionysius is generally dismissed as the potential author of On the Sublime, since the writing officially attributed to Dionysius differs from the work. So there are minor variations between the official writings of Dionysius of Halicarnassus and the writing style that we observe in On the Sublime. So we may safely conclude that the treatise must have been written by a Greek called Longinus in the early Christian era. So at present we use the term Pseudo-Longinus to refer to the author of On the Sublime, as we have contradictory opinions regarding who the actual author is. On the Sublime is written in epistolary form. An epistolary work, I know you are familiar with the term, is usually written through letters or journal entries or a combination of the two. There is a missing part to this treatise, which is the final part, which reportedly handles the topic of public speaking. Longinus dedicated the work to one Postumius Terentianus, a public figure in ancient Rome. Before Longinus, the critics believed that the function of poetry was to instruct or to delight, or both, and if it is prose, its function was to persuade also. But Longinus was not satisfied with this formula. He said that the epics of Homer, the lyrics of Sappho and Pindar, and the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles were great not only on account of these elements, but also on account of their sublimity. The aim of a great work of art is to transport the reader out of himself. It has a capacity to move the reader to divine joy. This is the quality of Sublime. So a great work of art does not only please or instruct, but it also moves, transports, elevates, and it pleases all, at all times. Now let us look at the usage of the word sublime by Longinus. By the word sublime, Longinus means elevation or loftiness, all that which raises style above the ordinary and gives to it distinction in its widest and truest sense. According to Longinus, sublimity consists in its certain distinction and excellence in expression. And Longinus goes to the extent of saying that it is from no other source than this that the greatest poets and writers have derived their eminence and gained an immortality of renown. Now, building upon his theory of sublimity, Longinus classifies its characteristics, and he says that there are 5 sources of sublimity. The first source is capacity for great thought and a firm grasp of ideas. Grandeur of thought or as it is said in the heading, capacity for great thought and a firm grasp of ideas, is one of the principal sources of the sublime. It is largely a gift of nature. It is essential for a sublime work. Men with mean and servile ideas cannot attain sublimity. In fact, great thoughts spring from great souls. And in short, we can say that it is the echo of a great soul. And in the words of Longinus, their words are full of sublimity, whose thoughts are full of majesty. The second source of sublimity is inspired emotion and strong passion. The second source of sublimity, according to Longinus, is vehement and inspired passion. Longinus asserts that nothing contributes more to loftiness of tone in writing than genuine emotion. But the emotions have to be true emotions and in the right place. He thus justifies emotions more artistically than Aristotle. However, the subject of emotions has not been dealt with in detail. The author declares his intention of dealing with it in a second treatise, which unfortunately has not come down to us. The third source of sublimity is use of figures of speech. According to Longinus, the third source of attaining excellence of style is by using figures of speech, which he considers very important, and therefore he devotes nearly 1/3 of his work to it. Used naturally, they, means figures of speech, impart elevation to style and are themselves made more effective by an elevated style. The figures of speech, thought and diction have to be judiciously employed. The fourth source of sublimity is noble diction. Diction includes choice and arrangement of words, and also the use of metaphors and ornamental language. The discussion of diction is incomplete because a part of his book is unfortunately lost. Nevertheless, we understand from what we have gathered so far that he considers it as a radiance that illuminates the innermost recesses of writer's mind. But it should be noted that imposing language is not suitable for every occasion. When the object is trivial, a petty thing, to invest it with grand and stately words would have the same effect as putting a full-sized tragic mask on the head of a little child. It becomes incompatible. It does not suit. There will be a mismatch. And this necessitates the use of common words, which, when inelegant, make up for it by their raciness and forcefulness. Among these ornaments of speech, Longinus considers metaphor as well as hyperbole. The last and the final source of sublimity is dignified and elevated composition. It is the fifth source. It comes out of a beautiful arrangement of words. It should be one that blends thought, emotion, figures, and words into a harmonious whole. Such an arrangement has not only a natural power of persuasion and of giving pleasure, but also the marvelous power of exalting the soul and swaying the heart of men. It makes the hearer or reader share the emotion of the speaker. Now, these are the 5 sources of sublimity that Longinus talks about in his most popular work on the Sublime. Longinus also talks about false sublime. Now, making a distinction between false and true sublime, Longinus says that the false sublime is characterized by 1. Turgidity or affectation, 2. Puerility or cold pedantry, and finally 3. False emotion or sentimentality. Let us very briefly look at what these 3 ideas are. Turgidity is the use of bombastic or ostentatiously lofty style in language. Longinus says that it is drier than dropsy, which means that it is as great an evil as a swelling in the body. While turgidity is an endeavor to go above the sublime, puerility is the sheer opposite of it. It is thoroughly low, mean, and ignoble voice. It manifests itself in cold pedantry, and thereby the work ends in frigidity, which means it does not convey much enthusiasm. The false sublime also results when there is a cheap display of passion. This is the third reason for making a false sublime. Now, when a passion is not justified by an occasion, it results in false sublime. So, these three factors can constitute what Longinus calls as false sublime. With that, we come to the end of this video lesson. We also come to the end of module 1. Thank you for watching and listening. I will see you in the next video. Thank you.